The letter arrived on a Wednesday. It was tucked between a catalog and a power bill. Nothing unusual at first glance, but Claire Ashford's fingers paused as soon as she touched it. The envelope was yellowed, unsealed, and her name was handwritten in blue ink she hadn't seen since childhood. There was no return address, no stamp, just her name, Claire Ashford, scrawled in sharp, slanted cursive that sent a rush of cold through her fingertips. She opened it standing in the kitchen, sunlight filtering through the city blinds, her half-empty mug of tea cooling by the stove, one sheet of lined paper folded once. No greeting, no signature. Just 8 words. He's still there, behind the furnace. R. Claire's breath caught in her throat. Her knees locked, as if her body was bracing for something it had waited years to forget. The city buzz fell away. No more distant horns, no footsteps from the neighbors above, just the faint ticking of the wall clock behind her, and the whisper of the past waking up. Her eyes went to the calendar. February 12th. It had been 27 years since her brother disappeared. The Ashford family farmhouse sat on the edge of Lewisburg, West Virginia, where the trees swallowed the sky and the roads narrowed into silence. It hadn't been Claire's home in decades, not since Nathan vanished. He was 9, she was 12. And one morning, after breakfast, after chores, after their father left for work and their mother went to town, he was simply gone. No signs of forced entry, no tracks in the snow, just the furnace running unusually hot. And the basement door found slightly open. The sheriff had searched the property. Cadaver dogs, helicopters, volunteers. The whole town of Lewisburg turned over every stone, but the house kept its silence. And the furnace room, sealed by rusted hinges and warped wood from a past winter flood, was deemed inaccessible. Nothing came of it. No closure, no answers, just grief, and eventually quiet. Claire stared at the note again. It wasn't the message that shook her, it was the handwriting. Richard Bell had been the maintenance man who worked for her father in the 90s, came by twice a year, always quiet, smelled faintly of smoke and oil. Nathan used to follow him around the property asking questions. Claire remembered his boots, how they thudded heavy on the porch steps, how he always carried a red thermos. He was the only other person who'd ever gone missing from Lewisburg that year. 3 days after Nathan, and no one talked about that. She didn't call anyone. She didn't rip the note. She didn't cry. Instead, she walked slowly to the hallway closet, knelt, and pulled down an old plastic storage box marked Ashford 1998. Inside, missing child flyers, newspaper clippings, her mother's handwritten notes, and a Polaroid of Nathan from that spring, plaid jacket, gap-toothed grin. He'd just lost his first molar. Claire stared at it for a long time. That night, the city felt too loud. So she packed a bag, took personal leave from the D.C. Bureau, told no one where she was going, just a 2-hour drive southwest, into a place the maps barely showed anymore. The closer she got, the more the landscape flattened. The gas stations grew sparse, the cell signal flickered out, and the houses leaned in toward the road like they remembered her. The farmhouse appeared at the end of a long gravel path choked with frost. The windows were dark, the shutters hung crooked, and the mailbox, once painted red with stenciled white letters, was rusted through, barely holding on. Claire parked and stepped out. The cold hit her like a slap, West Virginia cold, deep, and bone-dragging. She stood still for a moment, listening. No cars, no birds, no wind, just the hum of the furnace from deep within the house, like a memory warming the walls. The key still worked. Inside, everything was exactly as it had been, the same braided rug in the entryway, the ticking grandfather clock that hadn't worked since the early 2000s. Her father's coat still hung on the rack, his boots tucked neatly by the door as if he might come in at any moment. Claire closed the door behind her. The warmth inside wasn't comforting. It was wrong, too warm, too thick. The air in the house felt dense, like it had been holding its breath for nearly 30 years. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't need to. The house knew her. And she knew it. In the living room, the same photo hung above the fireplace, the four of them, taken 2 years before Nathan disappeared. Her mother's smile was frozen wide. Her father looked distracted, one hand in his pocket, Claire with braces and oversized glasses. And Nathan, eyes squinting, holding a small rubber dinosaur. She reached out to touch the frame. Dust, cold glass, memory. Later that evening, Claire sat at the kitchen table where her mother used to make cinnamon tea. Her laptop hummed beside her, casting a soft glow over the worn wood surface. She'd opened the county archives looking for any trace of Richard Bell after 1998. One article, a small blurb buried in the back of the Greenbrier Gazette, February 15, 1998. Lewisburg man missing. Richard Bell, 56, of Lewisburg, was last seen leaving the Ashford residence late Friday evening. Family reports he was scheduled for routine maintenance work. His truck was found abandoned near Highway 219. Claire's blood ran cold. His truck had been found, but she never heard that. No one ever told her. Why? At midnight, she descended the stairs. The basement door groaned on its hinges. The bulb above the stairwell still worked, though it flickered like it wasn't sure it wanted to. She walked slowly, flashlight in hand, her boots echoing on the concrete. The furnace room door sat where it always had, chained, warped, still marked with the scratches Nathan made with his toy screwdriver when he was 5. Claire paused in front of it. The chain had rusted further, but the padlock was missing, and on the wood, just above the handle, a single fingerprint, small, smudged, like a child had touched it recently. Claire stepped back. The house creaked, and somewhere above her, a door slowly clicked shut. Claire Ashford hadn't used the name Lewisburg in a sentence that wasn't followed by, "I don't talk about that place." In D.C., she was Claire, the case analyst with the highest clearance rate in her division, quiet, precise, controlled. The kind of person you trusted with the stories you were too scared to tell the police. But back in Lewisburg, she was still the sister of the boy who vanished, still the girl who came upstairs and said, "Nathan's not in his room," and didn't speak for 6 days after that. She never talked about it, not to co-workers, not to boyfriends. Her memory of Nathan wasn't a real loop. One moment, one stuck like something frozen under a sheet of ice. It never melted, it never changed. It just pulsed there, quiet, cold, patient. She spent the night on the living room couch, unable to make herself walk into her old bedroom. It still had the same floral wallpaper, the same rickety desk with her initials carved in the side. She had peeked inside before sunset, flicked on the lamp. The air had smelled like old. She closed the door and never went back. The living room at least had changed. Her mother had replaced the couch at some point, though the cushions were already worn. The photo of the family above the fireplace had been joined by others, graduations, weddings of distant cousins, an anniversary photo of her parents before the divorce. That one stung. She remembered when her father left. 3 years after Nathan, he never gave a reason, just packed a bag one morning and said, "Some houses don't let you move on." Claire hadn't understood that at 12. She thought it was a metaphor. Now she wasn't. The next morning she drove into town. Lewisburg had changed and hadn't. The gas station was now a Dollar General. The bakery had closed. The church had a fresh coat of paint. But Walt's Hardware still stood on the corner like it had since the 1970s. And behind the counter, Walt Henderson still wore the same gray beard and navy flannel jacket. He looked up, squinted, then smiled. "Well, I'll be damned." Claire smiled faintly. "Hey, Walt." "Thought I saw a ghost," he said, coming around the counter to hug her. He smelled like cedar and sawdust. "What brings you back? We didn't get snow. She paused. Got a letter? His smile faltered. The kind you keep or the kind you burn? She took out the folded note, handed it to him. Walt read it in silence. Then, behind the furnace, he said, flat. Damn thing always ran too hot. You remember? I remember everything from that week. His voice darkened. I helped board up the place after your mama moved out. And I was the one who found Richard Bell's truck out past the service road near the creek bend. You never told anyone? I did. Sheriff said it was abandoned. Said Richard probably left town. Claire nodded. You didn't believe that? No, Walt said, and I don't think you do either. They walked outside together. Claire leaned against the hood of her car, hands in her coat pockets. The wind bit sharp, carrying the scent of pine and something metallic, old train tracks maybe, or cold iron fence. You know what I remember about your brother? Walt said suddenly. Claire looked over. What? He used to talk to the house. Her eyebrows lifted. What do you mean? He said it had moods, said the pipes whispered when they were happy, said the furnace hummed louder when it was scared. Claire looked away, throat tight. I thought it was just kid stuff, Walt. But maybe he heard something the rest of us missed. Back at the farmhouse, Claire went into the attic. It was the one part of the house her mother always locked, but the key was in the drawer beneath the sink, taped to the back of the silverware tray. She found it easily. Old habits didn't die. The attic was colder than she expected. Dust stirred in the beam of her flashlight. The air smelled of mothballs, mildew, and something faintly sweet, like dried flowers or old tea. Boxes lined the left wall. Claire opened them one by one. Photos, receipts, Christmas ornaments. A sealed envelope marked Arbel, service notes. Her heart stuttered. Inside, she found a faded green notebook duct-taped at the spine. The first page was water-stained, the second legible. March 3rd, 1997. Ashford property, initial inspection. Furnace running hot. Basement wall shows unusual thermal signature, maybe structural weakness. She flipped ahead. June 10th, Nathan followed me downstairs again. Wall. I told him it's just the old coal chute, but I'm not sure anymore. Claire's hands trembled. July 4th. Found a gap behind the furnace. Hollow space, maybe 5 feet wide. No entry point. Not natural. And then, Feb 12th. I'm going back tonight. Something isn't right. I think the boy knows. I need to see what's behind the wall. That was the night he disappeared. Downstairs, Claire sat on the edge of the couch, the notebook in her lap. She remembered that night. Her mother had gone to bed early. Her father was out late at the bar. Claire had fallen asleep in front of the TV, Nathan curled beside her. And when she woke up, he was gone. That night, she dreamed of footsteps, not running, not panicked, just steady, rhythmic, the sound of boots on wooden stairs, and a voice she couldn't place saying, "He followed me down, but he didn't come back up." She woke before sunrise. The furnace had gone quiet. In the silence, she could hear the house again, the wind moving across the beams, the floorboards adjusting, the subtle creak of weight settling. Not haunting, just old wood and air, but still. It listened. She got up. She pulled on jeans, boots, a coat, and she went back to the basement. This time, she brought tools. Claire stood in the basement facing the sealed furnace room door. Her flashlight beam trembled slightly in her hand. She told herself it was just adrenaline. The chain had rusted but gave way with effort. The padlock was missing, just as she remembered, as if someone had removed it for her. As she pulled the door open, the smell hit her instantly. Not rot, not mold, old heat, dust, dry iron. The furnace sat like a beast gone cold, silent, square, black with soot. And just behind it, the back wall of the room, concrete, cracked. Claire stepped around the unit slowly, her boots scuffing the concrete. Then she saw it. A small rectangle of bricks, different from the rest of the wall, lighter mortar, uneven lines. A patch job, poorly done, rushed. Exactly like Richard Bell had described in his notebook. She pressed her gloved hand to it, warm, not faintly, not residual, actively warm, like something behind it held heat. She dropped her bag beside her and pulled out a hammer and chisel. Every strike echoed too loud. The mortar cracked, dry flakes falling like old ash. She worked in silence. No music, no thoughts, only rhythm. And finally one brick gave way. Behind it, darkness, not a tunnel, not a room, just a small cavity, maybe 5 feet deep, frost, big enough for a child. Claire crouched, aimed her flashlight inside, and froze. A blanket, folded, a plastic cup tipped on its sides, near the back wall. A pair of shoes, children's shoes, familiar, red canvas, one untied. Claire's stomach twisted. She had seen these before, in a photo, Nathan's 9th birthday. He was wearing them, brand new, a gift from their uncle. He'd called them his lucky shoes. And now they were here, dry, intact, sitting in a hidden cavity behind the furnace. She reached in and touched one, still warm. Claire stumbled back, chest tightening. She tried to steady her breath, but the image burned into her. Someone had placed the shoes there, folded the blanket, set the cup. It wasn't a grave. It was a hiding place, or a cell. She crawled further in, reached behind the cup, and found something else. A small plastic diner. Green. Tail chipped. She gasped. Nathan's. She remembered the fight they had over it. He'd accused her of stealing it. It had gone missing days before he vanished. Claire sat back on the basement floor, shaking. She turned off the flashlight and sat in the dark for a moment, eyes closed. She was no longer in the present. She was 12 again, her brother's voice echoing in her head. "Claire, look at this. The wall makes a humming sound when you press your ear to it. It's like there's something behind it." She'd laughed at him, told him he was being weird. He had sulked the rest of the day, and now, she realized, he had been right. The next morning Walt returned with gloves, a headlamp, and a small thermal scanner. She showed him the cavity. He said nothing for a long time. Just knelt down, flashes. When he finally stood, his face was... "They sealed it," he said. "Someone put him in there." Claire felt a lump rise in her throat. He wasn't hurt. "There's no..." "Doesn't mean it wasn't a prison," Walt said. He pulled something from inside the wall, a button, old brass, worn. There were letters carved into the underside, R.B. That night, Claire pulled out an old photo album, flipped to the back. There it was. A photo of her father and Richard Bell, standing by the woodshed. Bell wore a coat with brass buttons. One was missing. She turned the button in her hand again. He had been in that space, maybe with Nathan, maybe after Nathan, maybe. Claire's breath caught. What if they weren't the only two? The next day she visited Helen Quinn, the town librarian. Helen was in her 60s now, white hair in a braid, thick glasses. She had been Claire's Sunday school teacher once. "I remember when the flyers went up," Helen said softly, leading Claire to the archive room. "You and your brother had the same eyes." Claire nodded, trying not to speak. They sifted through boxes of old clippings. One article stopped Claire cold. Bell questioned in unrelated case date, 1985, location, Clarksburg, W.E. The article was short. Bell had been a contractor on a property where a young boy went missing, never charged, never arrested. Claire leaned back in the wooden chair, heart thudding. Why wasn't this in the reports? Helen shook her head. Most people didn't know. It wasn't public record. Got buried. Claire whispered, "How many others?" Later that evening, Claire searched her father's old filing cabinet in the garage. Most of it was bills, contracts, invoices for farm equipment, until she found a yellow envelope marked "Winter Repairs, R.B." inside, a letter folded into quarters, handwritten. "Jack, the boy's seen too much. He keeps asking about the wall. I tried to patch it, but it's not holding. You said you wanted to keep this quiet, but if anything happens to that kid, I won't carry it. You need to tell your wife. You need to end this before it ends you. R.R. Claire's vision blurred. Her father had known. He had known. That night she didn't sleep. She stood in the living room staring at the fireplace, at the photo above it, Nathan's face, his shoes, his dinosaur, his hiding place, and now the silence of a family that had lived with this for nearly 30 years. She walked to the phone, dialed her mother. It rang 6 times. Then connected. Her mother's voice was soft, cautious. "Claire, I found it." "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do," Claire said. "You always did." Her mother's breath caught, and then, quietly, "I never wanted to believe it," her mother repeated. Her voice was thin, tired, distant, like it had aged even more in the span of seconds. Claire sat on the edge of the couch, staring out the window into the night. The porch light was off. The yard bathed in silver from the winter moon. "You knew?" Claire said again, but her voice cracked. There was a pause on the line. "I suspected." "How long?" Her mother sighed. "Since the night you found him missing. I searched the basement after you fell asleep. I saw the furnace was open." "But the wall, it looked untouched." "I convinced myself I imagined it." "You didn't," Claire whispered. "I found one of Nathan's toys down there the next day. He had the little red truck." Claire's throat tightened. "You never told the police." "They thought he ran away. I didn't correct them." Claire blinked back heat behind her eyes. "Why?" Her mother's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because your father told me it was safer that way." The silence between them stretched. Then Claire asked the question she had been. "Was Dad involved?" Her mother didn't answer at first. Then, "He knew more than he said, but he thought he was protected." Claire felt like the air had been sucked from the room. Her mother's voice wavered. "He didn't do anything to Nathan, Claire, I swear. But he knew Belle had secrets. He was scared they'd come back on all of us." Claire swallowed hard. Belle was hiding something in that wall. "He used it. Maybe more than once." "I know," her mother said, barely audible. "But your father thought confronting it would destroy what was left of us." It already did. The next morning, Claire and Walt returned to the basement. This time, Walt brought a compact camera, rope, gloves, and a small crowbar. Claire showed him the cavity again, the shoes, the cup, the dinosaur now placed in a plastic evidence box. "Whoever hit him here wanted him alive," she said, "for a while at least. Or wanted him silent." They examined the patchwork again. Behind the cavity, more bricks, too shallow to be structural, too new to be original. "We're missing something," Walt muttered. Claire knelt down, ran her hand along the floor of the cavity. Cold concrete, but her fingers caught on a groove. She pulled the flashlight closer. A narrow rectangle etched into the floor, maybe 2 feet long, a foot wide. She pried at the edge with the crowbar. The concrete shifted. Walt helped. And then it lifted. Beneath it, a hollow space. Inside, a black trash bag, torn at the corner, a rusted thermos, a wallet. Claire pulled the bag out slowly. Inside, wrapped in decayed cloth, were bones. Small, clearly human, but fractured, incomplete. She turned to the wallet. Walt gasped. "It's Belle's." Claire sat on the basement floor, holding the leather wallet like it might vanish. The driver's license was still intact. Richard Belle, age 56. Lewisburg, W.V. The date of issue matched the year Nathan disappeared. He didn't run, Claire's. He never left town. Walt nodded grimly. He was buried here, by someone who knew exactly where to hide him. Claire thought of her father, the late nights, the unexplained absences, the silence after the police gave up. Then she remembered something else, something small, almost forgotten. Her father had locked the basement after the week Nathan disappeared, told them it was flooded. Claire had believed him. They brought the remains to the sheriff's office that afternoon. The current sheriff, Elijah Brooks, had been a rookie deputy in 1998. He took one look at the evidence and went pale. Claire handed him the photos, the notebook, the objects from the cavity. Brooks sat back heavily in his chair. I remember Bell. He was quiet, wore that same coat all the time, drove an old Ford, but I never heard anything about them. No one did, Claire said. Because someone covered it. Brooks looked at her. Are you saying your father? I'm saying he knew, Claire said, voice steady. He let the case go cold. He didn't want to know what was behind that wall. Brooks swallowed hard. I'll order DNA testing. The bones, the cup, the thermos. But if Bell's remains were here, and if your brother's belongings were in the same space— He didn't finish the sentence. Claire returned to the farmhouse that evening in silence. Walt stayed behind to speak with the sheriff. She sat on the porch swing, wrapped in an old quilt, watching the trees shift under the gray sky. The wind moved through them like breath. She remembered sitting there as a kid, Nathan beside her, legs swinging. He used to hum when he was bored, some made-up tune, off-key and repetitive. She almost heard it now. But it was memory, not ghosts. That night she went back to the attic. This time she looked for something different, not evidence. Not proof, just memory. She found a shoebox under a pile of linens. Inside, old letters, a dried rose, a VHS tape labeled Thanksgiving, 1997. She brought the tape downstairs, connected the VCR in the living room. It crackled to life. Footage played. The family gathered around a turkey. Laughter. Her mother smiling. Her father carving the meat. Nathan wearing a paper crown. Then, near the end of the tape, Claire saw something Richard Bell standing by the basement, talking to her father. The sound was muted, but Bell looked tense. Her father nodded once, then shut the door behind him. The timestamp, 3 days before Nathan vanished. The next day the sheriff called. The preliminary DNA on the bones confirmed it. Richard Bell had died beneath the Ashford house. No visible signs of trauma, no bullet, no blunt force, just decay, starvation, dehydration, accidental entrapment, or deliberate abandonment. Claire stared at the report. If he hadn't been killed, then someone left him there to die. Later, she met with Walt on the back porch. They sat in silence, drinking black coffee from mismatched mugs. What if Bell wasn't the monster? Claire asked. Walt looked over. What do you mean? What if he found something he wasn't supposed to? Maybe even tried to save Nathan. Walt furrowed his brow, and someone stopped him. Claire nodded. My father. Walt exhaled. You think Jack killed him? I think he made sure no one else would find what Bell found. That evening, Claire opened the last drawer in her father's desk. Inside, a single key, wrapped in plastic, labeled Shed, Rear Padlock. She hadn't opened the tool shed in years. At dusk, she walked behind the house. The padlock was old, rusted. She turned the key. It clicked. Inside, the shed smelled of oil and mouse droppings. She flicked on her flashlight. The beam landed on a red toolbox, a tarp, and a small wooden crate nailed shut. She pried it open. Inside, a cassette recorder, a journal, and a note. If anything happens, this tells the truth. Don't let them bury it again. The signature, R.B. Claire sat on the floor of the shed and opened the journal. The last entry. The boy's alive. I saw him through the bricks, but he's scared. Doesn't speak. I left food, water. I tried to tell Jack. He won't listen. He says it'll go away if we stop talking. I think he's wrong. I think we're all wrong. If I disappear, check the furnace wall. Claire looked up at the dark yard, heart pounding. The wall wasn't a hiding place. It was a prison. Claire sat at the kitchen table with the journal open in front of her. A half-drunk cup of coffee had gone cold beside it. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reread the final entry. The boy's alive. I saw him through the bricks. He's scared. Doesn't speak. I left food, water. He won't listen. He says it'll go away if we stop talking. If I disappear, check the furnace wall. She turned the page. There were no more entries, just a blank space where the rest of Richard Bell's words should have been. But it was enough. Her father hadn't killed Bell. He hadn't killed Nathan. But he had known. And he had chosen silence over truth, secrecy over rescue, shame over salvation. Claire couldn't stop replaying the possibilities. Bell finds Nathan, alive, hiding, maybe locked in. He tries to help. Her father stops him, maybe not violently, but by sealing them both inside. Her stomach turned. Was it fear or something darker? The next morning she drove to the cemetery. Her father's grave sat on a small hill facing east. No flowers, just a flat bronze plaque. Jack Ashford, 1949-2011. Some truths are heavy. She knelt in front of it, the wind catching strands of her hair. You left us in that house. You let him die, or you let him stay. Her voice cracked. I don't know which is worse. Back at the house, she found her mother in the sunroom, seated in a worn armchair, knitting without progress, just looping the same thread over and over. Claire stood in the doorway holding the cassette recorder from the shed. I need to know everything, she said. Now. Her mother didn't look surprised. They sat in silence as the cassette played. Richard Bell's voice was clear but cautious. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it out. The boy is somewhere behind the wall. I've left markers. Jack won't help. Says it's better if he's forgotten. But I saw him. Claire, if you're the one listening, I'm sorry, I tried. Her mother's hands shook. Claire paused the tape. You knew, she said. I suspected. No, Claire said louder now. You knew. You found the toy truck. You knew Dad changed the locks. You stayed quiet. Her mother's eyes welled. I was afraid. Claire slammed her palm on the table. Of what? Of losing both of you, her mother snapped. Voice raw now. You were 12. You were barely holding on. Your father said Nathan was gone, that we had to move on or the house would swallow us. Claire leaned back, stunned. Is that what it did? Swallowed us? That evening, Claire walked the perimeter of the basement again. She tapped every brick, every beam. There had to be something more. The journal said, I left markers. Then, near the eastern wall, behind the water heater, she saw it. A tiny red arrow, barely visible, etched into the concrete. She followed it to another, then another. Finally, she reached the far corner where the foundation met the dirt wall. Claire crouched. The flashlight flickered. Then she saw it. A crack, a hairline seam in the foundation. Her breath caught. She pried her fingers into it and pulled. A panel slid loose. Behind it, a small tunnel, crawling height, earthen walls, dry, intact. Claire didn't hesitate. She grabbed gloves, tied her hair back, and slid inside. The tunnel curved left, then right. The air grew warmer. Dust danced in the beam of her light. And then, after 5 minutes of crawling, a chamber, small, round, no more than 8 feet across. Claire stood, eyes scanning every inch. It wasn't empty. Against one wall sat a folded blanket, a stack of old books, a notebook, weather-worn but intact and pinned to the wall with a nail. A photo. Claire stepped closer. The photo was of her, age 12, smiling, braces and all. Nathan had taken that picture. She remembered the day. He had kept it, here. She picked up the notebook. The first page was labeled in shaky handwriting, Property of Nathan Ashford. Claire's hands trembled as she turned the pages. The entries were brief, childish at first, then darker, more sparse. Dad said I had to stay here. He said it's just for now. I'm not supposed to tell Mom. Bell comes sometimes, brings food. I don't like the dark. It listens. Claire felt the tears break loose. Her legs buckled and she slid to the ground. The final entry. I heard yelling, Bell and Dad. Then it got quiet. I think they forgot me. But I remember Claire. If she comes back, I'll know. I'll wait. Claire didn't remember crawling out of the tunnel. didn't remember standing. She just knew she was outside again, air stinging her face, knees bruised, hands shaking. Nathan had lived. Not for long, but long enough to know he had been left, and long enough to hold on to the only memory that mattered to him, her. That night, Claire sat in the living room with the notebook in her lap and the photo of her younger self beside it. The house was quiet now, not peaceful, just tired. As if it too had finally released the breath it had been holding for 27 years. She called Walt, told him everything. He came immediately. Together, they sat by the fireplace, the tape recorder playing again. They listened in silence. When it ended, Walt asked softly, "What do you want to do now?" Claire stared into the embers. Claire didn't speak for the rest of the day. She sat on the floor of the living room with Nathan's notebook beside her, the fire low, the photo of her 12-year-old self curled slightly at the edges from time and heat. Her younger self stared back at her with bright eyes and crooked teeth, the smile Nathan had kept. She wondered if he'd held on to it every day down there. The morning came quietly, no birds, no wind, just gray light over frost-bitten grass and the sound of old plumbing sighing through the walls. Claire walked to the kitchen, poured coffee, didn't drink it. She stood in front of the sink for almost 20 minutes without moving. Then she picked up the phone and called her mother. The house had changed little in the years since her father died. Her mother still lived in the same pale blue ranch house on Ashford Hill. The curtains were the same, the smell of chamomile and lemon oil still lingering in the air. Claire stood in the doorway with the notebook in her hands. Her mother looked smaller than she remembered. "Did you know about the tunnel?" Claire asked. Her mother closed her eyes. "I suspected something was there, but I didn't look for it. Your father told me it was a root cellar, that it was sealed for safety, that Richard Bell was a danger." Claire stepped forward. "He lied." "I know that now," her mother whispered, "but I didn't then." "You could have saved him." "I know." Tears welled. "You let him disappear, and you let me grow up with that silence." Her mother's voice trembled. "I couldn't lose you, too." "You lost both of us anyway." They sat in silence at the kitchen table. Claire placed the notebook between them. Her mother didn't touch. "I want to bury him properly," Claire said. "Not with headlines or cameras, just right." Her mother nodded slowly. "I'll help," she said. 3 days later, a private funeral was held on the hill behind the farmhouse. The sheriff expedited the remains' release. No press, no questions. Just Claire, her mother, Walt, and a reverend who didn't ask too many questions. Claire held Nathan's notebook in her coat pocket. They buried the box beneath the same oak tree where Nathan used to build forts from fallen branches. Claire placed the toy dinosaur inside with him, and the photograph, and a new pair of red canvas shoes. She knelt by the grave as the dirt fell. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have listened to you that day. I should have gone down the stairs." That night, Claire sat on the porch steps with Walt. The air was cold, stars scattered above like quiet witnesses. "You ever going to leave again?" he asked. Claire sipped from her mug. "I don't know." "You could stay. This town owes you the truth, at least." She shook her head. "They owe Nathan more." A week later, Claire stood in the basement for the last time. The wall had been resealed. Not to hide the past, but to mark it. She placed a plaque on the bricks. "Here rests silence no longer. Nathan Ashford, remembered, and Richard Bell, not forgotten." Before leaving the house, Claire visited her father's grave one last time. She didn't bring flowers. She brought the page from Bell's journal that said, "The boy is alive. Don't let them forget." She left it on the grass. No stone-needed words after that. The last thing Claire did before driving out of Lewisburg was leave a sealed envelope at the sheriff's office. Inside, the VHS tape, copies of the journal, her full statement. It was addressed to Elijah Brooks, but she knew it wasn't just for him. It was for whoever lived in that house next. The letter had arrived on a Wednesday. Claire remembered that now, more vividly than anything else. Tucked between routine and silence, it had changed everything. 8 words that pulled a woman out of her apartment in D.C. and dropped her back into a frozen world that had once swallowed her brother whole. He's still there. R.A. warning. A final attempt at... Claire had followed it like a thread, and at the end, she didn't find a body. She found a boy who never stopped remembering. A year passed. The farmhouse sold in the spring to a couple from Pennsylvania. They painted the shutters, tore up the braided rug, planted lilacs along the... But the furnace stayed, the basement stayed. And on the wall behind the furnace door, carefully preserved beneath glass, stayed the plaque. Here rests silence no longer. Nathan Ashford, remembered, and Richard Bell, not forgotten. They never asked about it, but they never removed it. Claire moved back to Lewisburg that fall. Not to the house. That chapter had closed. She bought a small Craftsman near the old library, close enough to the courthouse, far enough from memory. She began teaching part-time at the community college. Criminal psychology. But not the kind they teach in manuals. She taught about silence and memory, and what happens when people choose not to see. She told her students stories, never names. But one day, in her final class of the semester, she held up a small red shoe, worn, canvas, faded. And she said, "Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's about remembering what was lost, so it doesn't disappear again." The students wrote papers. Some cried. One girl stayed behind after class and said, "My brother disappeared when I was 7. They never found him." Claire nodded and sat beside her. "Tell me what you remember." They stayed there for over an hour, not searching for evidence, just for a place where memory could live out loud. That Christmas, Walt dropped by with his wife and a basket of homemade jam. They sat by Claire's fireplace, drinking cider, laughing about things that had nothing to do with the past. But before he left, Walt handed her a small package. Inside, a framed copy of Nathan's notebook cover, weathered edges, childlike scrawl, property of Nathan Ashford. Claire didn't speak, just nodded. Walt said, "He waited for you." And Claire said, "Myself, I know." Sometimes, at night, she walks out to the edge of town, to the tree behind the old farmhouse. It's taller now, its roots deeper, and beneath it rests a boy who was never truly lost, just never truly heard. Claire sits on the bench the city placed nearby, carved into the backrest. Some names aren't meant to be whispered, they're meant to be spoken. One evening, a child visits the plaque behind the furnace with his father, a boy no older than Nathan had been. He asks, "Who's this?" His father says, "Someone who loved stories." The boy stares for a long time, then smiles, and the house stays quiet, but not empty, just at peace. And Claire? She writes now, not novels, letters, to people who lost someone and never got answers, to people who remember in silence. Every letter ends the same way. "I don't know your story, but I believe it deserves to be told, because some stories don't need to be solved. They just need to be remembered." And sometimes, when the wind moves through the trees outside her window and the air goes still, she thinks she hears humming, a made-up song off-key, repetitive, and she smiles, because she knows he's free now, not because she found him, but because she refused to forget.